Pleasure to be with you all today. Carbon Consultancy is there to work with event planners to help them, first of all, measure the carbon footprint of their event. It's there to help make recommendations on how that footprint can be reduced. And finally, it's there to help offset any remaining carbon emissions from their event. So to start with, what we've done is we've looked at the show previously. So as the start point, the benchmark for going forward, what is the carbon footprint? Traditionally, the key factors that make up your footprint are four sort of things. They're your travel. You'll hopefully have noticed that we've been asking you about how you've been getting to the venue today so that we can reassess the footprint following today's event. You'll factor in your hospitality, your catering, you'll factor in the event space usage, and then you'll look at ancillary things like promotional materials. So we've looked at the show from before we made any changes to work that footprint out. Any ideas what you think the footprint might be? Does anyone know a little bit about carbon? Okay. So this is how it's all sort of split out. The overall footprint currently is 12.5 tonnes. And that's an estimate, as I say, based on the show from before. To put that into context for you, 12.5 tonnes is what you or I would produce over a year. Made up of all our living, breathing, everything that we do, home life, work life, 12.5 tonnes. That's what the show, the impact in carbon emissions has had. The makeup of it, carbon footprints will always be a little bit different. Traditionally, you would expect travel to take up quite a big part of it. And you may expect that to be up to 60%, especially if you had international flights being involved in it. But as you can see here, we've got a fairly even sort of split between our travel, between the catering, and then promotional materials. So some of the takeaways that we've looked at, if we break that down a little bit further, you can report on all of the different aspects individually and then take aim at how you can make those changes. So if, first of all, we look at the catering, you'll see some subtle changes today in the content of the catering where we've introduced some more plant-based items. One of the things that you can do is start thinking about taking things like red meat out of your menu. So we've started to make those introductions. Going forward, that's something that you could really push forward. And for this event alone, if we went completely plant-based between breakfast and lunch, we could save two tonnes of carbon, which is 2 flights from Paris to New York. So again, always good to visualise. As I was telling these guys, I'm a very visual person. So if you want to think about what a tonne of carbon looks like, it's 5 double-decker buses. So 2 tonnes, 10 double-decker buses. The other thing that we can do differently is think about travel. As I say, hopefully you've captured your travel today, and we can measure that footprint and start talking about predominantly where events take place, because that makes a big, big difference to your travel. And finally, promotional material, what you do in terms of giveaways. I think there's a lot to think about there in that space. As event organisers, it's probably the biggest thing that people talk to us about in terms of making changes, sustainable changes, what do they do with that? So that's one of the things that we've looked at measuring, just to give us that overall picture.
Danielle.
Yeah. So if we look at this event in terms of some sustainable wins that we have, and obviously this session is very much about progress, not perfection. We've said in the past, the most sustainable event is no event, but we did that for 2 years and we know how that went. So, the event industry is here, is still amazing. And, we have a huge, as Alex said, we have a huge reach and a huge influence that we can have through events, with the different industries that we touch. So it's important that we push for that, but we just need to be doing them in different ways. So these were a couple of things that we tried to introduce this year. So as Pauline was saying, a move towards a more plant-based menu. So we haven't fully removed meat from the menu, but definitely sort of moving towards that, because that can have a huge impact. There is a huge amount of food wastage, particularly in the event industry. We are fortunate here that it's not a buffet. Buffets are hugely wasteful, but doing more sort of food to order and being more responsible with your catering can have a massive impact. And the HAC, we're fortunate that CSCs are their in-house catering provider, and they are fantastic with their sustainability. And they actually have a partnership with Too Good To Go to make sure that food that is there's nothing wrong with it. We purely just have too much and wasn't eaten, that it can be redistributed and given to other people that need it. So looking at how you can make the most out of the materials that you've got, particularly food, and making sure that we're reducing that waste is massive. As Pauline mentioned, having that full carbon measurement and benchmarking this year is, the sort of the line in the sand, if you like, so that what we're looking at for next year would be to reduce that. And having all of that data, having all of that carbon measurement is your starting point for any event that you're managing, because if you don't know what you're using, how can you reduce it? So that's the first step of the journey, really. A couple of other things: removal of the tote bags. I think, as we came in previously, you used to be given a tote bag that you can then put all of your giveaways in. Hopefully we're seeing a reduction in that, and people looking at sort of alternatives or looking at sustainable gifts as an alternative. There was an option to plant a tree when you registered. I think there was a candle, Uber voucher. You could donate your gift, refuse the gift, or you could plant a tree. And we're fortunate as well that BNC are matching that with the tree planting scheme. And that's very much, there's nothing wrong with planting trees, but just to be clear, that's not offsetting the event. That's just because planting trees is a good thing. So in terms of the offsetting the carbon footprint from this event, that will be done through another channel. Because trees, as we know, it takes a good 10 years for that to actually get to a stage before it's sequestering any carbon. Not to get too sciencey about it. Paper name badges. We used to have the paper, the plastic wallets that would go in, but you've got the paper name badges that can be recycled. The lanyards, we reuse. I've heard lots of stories that people are excited to get their new lanyard every year because they reuse them at events all year round, so that's good. And I think the key thing that we're trying to get across, as the title would suggest, is just start talking about it. We don't all have to be experts, we just have to care. That's the most important thing. So talk to people, talk to your suppliers, talk to your customers, talk to attendees at events, and that's what we want to run this session for, to understand what challenges do you face and what blockers are there. And I'm sure there's lots of initiatives that you're already running or suppliers that you're using, and this is a great space to sort of share that, because that we really want to help with sharing that story and giving people the confidence to have a go. Some things will work, some things might not, there will be blockers, but collectively it is very much about a collaboration, and so we all need to sort of work together to sort of overcome those challenges, and we're trying through the different tips and tricks and things to sort of share that information. So that's just a couple of things there.
That's quite a lot to take in. We obviously want to change, and fortunately the team is quite small, the BNC, so we can implement change very quickly. We're very keen to do that, very keen obviously to keep on running the shows, but keep on improving each year. The food aspect seems to be a relatively easier win than some of the other areas, adjusting to plant-based food that I saw in Financial Times yesterday, that it's been knocked off the top spot because of budget, and plant-based foods are now getting more expensive, and therefore is that going to be an option where we are then faced with having to pay a premium to do what we feel morally obliged to do. And I think that's going to come across all our desks in the next coming months and years. It's only going to go away, this problem. It's only going to get worse. And until we all find some platform where we can adjust and feel comfortable that what we're doing in a domestic environment, recycling and turning heating down a little bit here, and all the things we do at home, filters through into our workplace. One of the points that we've been discussing are the gifts. The catering seems to be an easier conversation. And I mean, just as a show of hands, do people feel that running an entire plant-based menu from breakfast, lunch, everything the whole day is a bad thing? I mean, or do you think we should still have red meat on the menu? Red meat on the menu, yes or no? No. But then the implications, of course, of that, not that we want to go down that rabbit hole of conversation today, because there's too much to talk about, is that the consequences of not having red meat on the menu will affect people's livelihoods and farming. So there's another conversation to be had as a result of making a decision. And if we're looking at 1.6 million mouths per year that we're feeding within this room, small room, big influence, that's 1,600,000, maybe even more, people's map, that we're affecting part of the traditional food we give out to event, at events. So making those decisions are enormous, a big responsibility to make. Challenges and acceptance, and I think this is quite an interesting thing. This is meant to be more of a forum rather than just us three on the stage. We're all event planners. That's what we do for a living, or run a venue. But do you often find, is there anybody that finds some sort of, a hindrance to stakeholders or people that you report into, where they're going, well, we've always done it this way, we don't want change? Is anybody finding that at all? Or is there change? Do people want change?
I think we have to change.
We know we have to change, but are you finding that is that accepted within your organisation, that from your senior management, they're happy to make that change?
Yes.
Are they happy to do it if there's a premium on cost for that change? Brilliant. In which case, that must be
That's music to my ears.
Yeah.
Do you get feedback that they feel that sustainability is a more expensive option? Do you get the sort of pushback, it costs more to do that?
It's not always, but yeah, convincing clients we're a sustainable events agency, so we we help clients also organise those events in a sustainable way. But not having a tote bag will be cheaper than having that tote bag, right? So and you're more sustainable already.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I struggle with the challenge of it costs more, because for me, I think sustainability is a lot more about efficiency and doing more with less. And if you are repurposing materials, if you're renting furniture, you're renting equipment rather than buying them, rather than using materials, they're constantly being used, they're constantly in motion. So not only the carbon footprint element, but actually the budgetary element, it just makes more sense. So I do struggle when people say, oh, yeah, but it costs more. Because actually, if you get rid of all the crap that you don't need, you've actually got, you're actually making money. And, we will be finding a way where, sustainability will become, a line on your budget sheet in terms of, it's almost a premium to have you can charge more because you're offering sustainable solutions. So there's a way to make money, not just save money.
I think it's locality as well, because the driver, just going back to some of the things you're touching on there about making that choice between red meat or plant-based, it's always going to be what's local, what's locally available, what's seasonal. And that's the same with the supply chain that you work with. What will keep the cost down is to always have a local supplier, because it keeps the air miles down, the sort of carbon miles down, and that makes a big difference.
And seasonal as well, you want to know that you're not shipping in, yes, avocados are plant-based, but if you're shipping those in from South America, that's an issue. So yeah, exactly that. It's looking at your food miles, but also what's in season for the time.
One of the areas that we're all in control of, and venues as well, everything trickles down and filters down to suppliers. And every supplier will probably say that they have credentials that they are happy to have or strive to have. And it's about knowing, are those real and are they appropriate for the event that we're planning? And yesterday I got involved in really quite an in-depth conversation with one of the techie guys here, who said there was an event that we will know. It's in central London, it happens once a year. I'm not going to drill down to any more than that. But they burn 1 million litres of fuel, of diesel, for this particular show, 1 million litres. And they buy the fuel in at £1.83, but they're now being obliged to use as a biofuel at £2.20 a litre. And that's quite a big leap when you're looking at a million litres, it's big numbers. And how just in one sector of the industry, the AV and the production industry, take one of the big festivals, another one which Tim, you were mentioning before, that they were using green vehicles during the day, but they were charging those green vehicles with diesel-powered jennies at night, which, under the cover of darkness, which can mean all sorts of things, isn't it? But on the daytime, when we can all see them being green, that's fantastic, but actually lights down all the bed and the generators are pumping away, charging up the electric vehicles. So that kind of doesn't sit well. So how far are you going to push your suppliers to find out, really, are they really doing the advice they are doing? Are they going to try and charge more? How much time have you got to afford to drill down to that supplier to find out they're using reusable cable ties or cable ties that happen to biodegrade? Tiny little aspects that are all inherently important in our work. If we're doing numbers of 1.5 million people a year as a group in this room, that's the numbers you drill down into all those elements. This event for 500-600 people, not 1.5 million. Look at our carbon footprint for just 600 people for one day, doing 1,600,000. That's phenomenal numbers that we're pumping out between us.
I think with that becomes perhaps a little bit of an obstacle at the moment. But because there are those clear targets about net zero 2050, you should expect your supply chain to have some kind of plan, some kind of journey. And very quickly, you'll move away from having to ask your suppliers what their footprint is, because that will already be being managed by them. And we're just going through that little bit of pain at the moment while everyone gets the plan and starts working towards it. But you should expect to have a sustainable supply chain going forward. That should be a given. And ask the question, as we've done with all of the suppliers.
Absolutely. I mean, at Reward, we design all of our events based on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So similar to Alec, what you were just saying, there is a lot, right? There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And if you look at all the minutiae of all of our different events, there is a lot to look at. But I think what's important, and particularly, what this session is hoping to address, is that you haven't got to do all of those at once, and you haven't got to do all of those overnight, and working with the right partners, whether that's a sustainability expert or working with sustainable venues, sustainable suppliers, having that support around you. You haven't got to do it all on your own, and sharing that load, working with the right venue for your event. You can cover off, if you have a sustainable venue, you can cover off your energy, you can cover off your food wastage, you can cover off your waste management. There's so many boxes you can tick just by working with the right people. So these aren't all things that you have to do on your own. But it's a case of, I think, breaking it down and coming back to the carbon footprint piece, looking at, what is this showing me and where are our biggest areas that we can have the biggest impact, and then drilling into that to find solutions rather than trying to think about everything all at once, because, it is overwhelming. And I think that's the problem, that people feel, I don't know where to start, so I won't. And that's what we need to overcome, that, we don't have to be perfect, we don't have to be experts, we just need to start the journey and start the process and share what we're doing. And as you say, hopefully there won't be such thing as a sustainable event industry, it will just be the event industry, because that's how the norm will go. When legislation and taxes and fines start coming in, when people aren't following sustainability policies, we're not at that stage yet, but that is coming. So the more you can do now and you can get ahead, the better it is for everyone.
It's still such a huge subject, and we are able to come to your organisation and your organisation to help us through that journey. Correct?
God, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then there's lots of people out there, not that, but there's lots of, I think there's the ladies in the audience, there's lots of people specialising in sustainability now, or if not, they will have a sustainability person within their organisation that is focusing on it. So it is, that there is a lot of people, there's a lot of help out there.
And there is just that sense of, as you see, it's taking the steps. We would like to think that we're experts, we just know that little bit more. And the best thing you can do is talk about it and ask the question. Even if you just ask the question internally, how do we make this more sustainable? We want to do something, then that's the start point.
Useful. Any questions? I mean, do fire in. Yes, sir.
You said there were some easy wins for the show, some greater challenges in terms of sustainability. What do you see as the greater challenges to making the show more sustainable?
Tweaking a model that works. On our 10th anniversary, we haven't really changed predominantly from day one. So the model was designed 10 years ago, or 11 years ago, when we came up with the idea of creating a one-day show, not having exhibition carpet, which is the bugbear of my life. You get one use and throw it out. You might get a second lay, but then it goes into landfill. So we wanted to choose venues where exhibition court wasn't needed. My other show, the London Motor Show, we used to get through £20,000, £30,000 worth of carpet, and I just There was no solution. There was no other. That's not the show. That didn't have. that was a problem to address. The easy wins and the challenges is that by tweaking a model that has always worked and worked exceptionally well in Kim and I's view, is that you don't want to change things too rapidly for fear of it not continuing on the same journey. The catering one is interesting because that, to me, is an easier win because, generally speaking, people are happy to have plant-based food. I had a portobello mushroom brioche this morning, and it was the best thing I've had ever. It was utterly, I might be hungry, but it was utterly, if they're still out there, I'd definitely suggest getting them. And I'd choose that over a bacon sandwich now. I don't eat bacon. So that's fine. On the gifts, it's interesting because the gifts are part of our DNA. It's always been a bit of a fun thing to do, to thank people for their time for coming to the show. Now, what do those gifts include, and what makes someone feel, oh, that's a nice thing to do? So we've always done things like candles and the higher end stuff, which is the Jimmy Choos and the Louboutins and Marbury handbags. Not for everybody, just one of each, just before there's a mad rush outside, which they are outside. Well, the handbags are. But the candles, granted, that was some feedback which I hadn't looked at because they've always worked. People have been very happy with the candles. They're great, lovely little gift to say thanks for coming on. Appreciate your time. But if we can replace that with the trees, that is a double tick. And something which I would really welcome, but we do it slowly and not overnight, so it's not suddenly all the other gifts have gone and it's all about trees. We started talking earlier about what else could we replace other than trees, and things like rewards, and I think, or activity days where you can actually go away and learn a bit more about sustainability, where you can go on a cooking course with a specialist chef who can actually teach you how to do it. But instead of a candle, it's a 3-hour course with a professional chef in this particular context who can teach you about catering and that. So more about sort of activity-based gifts, if you like, rather than candles, which clearly come up as a big no-no on the screen. Yes?
And just on the sustainable gifting for the events, have you thought about replacing the traditional gifts for the sustainable ones? So rather than going completely no gifts, let's plant a tree, which also I've heard recently they plant trees, but they have to cut the tree first because lots of companies just have limited amount of space. So to plant a tree, they cut the tree and then they plant it. So just also need to be aware about the greenwashing here, but have you thought of then buying products, for example, from social enterprises, people that will support, charities or products made by people with learning disabilities, but they, for example, they can make some pottery items and things like that.
I will say absolutely now that is a route that we're going to be looking at in much more detail. I think that's something that I'm looking at a key person in the audience here that I think we can agree that that's something that we are going to really look at.
I think when you look at the data, it speaks for itself. And I used to work at a financial services institution, and that was very much the salespeople wanted their goodies and wanted their giveaways to have at stands and things like that. And I do think that has changed over the years. I don't think there is an expectance for people to have giveaways, and I think that the mood is definitely moving towards more investing in that experience-led idea, and certainly to your point about investing in social enterprises or charities, and I did start an initiative there where instead of spending however much you would spend on a gift per person, actually investing that in either working with local charities or local initiatives that you could immediately see the impact of local to the event so that it was giving back, but also looking at, okay, what is your event about and how can that align to charities? And there were, I think, 3 or 4 charities that we would choose, and as an individual and as an attendee, you could choose where, a bit like, in the supermarket, you get the token and you can choose which charity you want to support. But so there was still an element of choice, but, ultimately we don't need more stuff. Like, that is the problem. Globally in terms of consumerism, and so we need to really sort of drill back on that, but you can still give the gift of giving to your attendees or your delegates or to clients, but it doesn't have to be in the way of a candle or a bag or pair of shoes or whatever. We can move away from that consumer-led consumerism idea and into more something that actually means something, and they're going to remember and they're going to talk about it. That's where we need to sort of move towards that idea.
Absolutely agree. I mean, we stopped it 3 years ago, and without not sounding controversial, I think you need to have more faith in the event professionals that come to that, because I think they still come with the strength of the exhibition, not because they're taking a handle home. I think it's, whilst you're saying it's a selfish approach, and maybe ask the audience, I think if you stop doing it for the next show, I doubt there'll be people who say we're not coming because we don't get it.
I don't think it's ever been. It's just part of it, as much as the free food. And, it's just the day's experience. And I'm very, very happy to discuss with the team ways of adjusting it, changing it. We're not so set in our ways that we won't. And by looking at these in detail, it's been refreshing actually. And things like the tote bag. To me, I just looked at a tote bag in years gone by, going, right, someone's made it, someone's been employed to do it. It's good branding on the outside. It serves a purpose. I often see that bag unrelated weeks later in someone wearing it in some obscure place, miles away from where the show was. So therefore, the branding carries on. And you're going, well, that's giving quite good value for money, that bag. But then you flag it up and go, actually, do you know what? That's an investment. And it makes carbon, it increases our carbon. So therefore,
it's the water that goes into making it, it's the material, it's where it's being made, and how many of these bag for lives do you need? I mean, there's so many, and then you think, well, but there still exists, and how many do we need? So it's trying to, again, coming back to the stuff issue thing. The idea is reusing and reusing and reusing and reusing rather than creating new.
I think just going back to your point about trees and different things like that, it's all about the data. So having the data and having the really clear footprint, knowing that you've got that from validated sources and that's real information, that lets you know the choice that you're making, whether you move from one thing to the next, is the right thing to do. And the tree planting and the offsetting and everything is a completely different conversation, as you say, because you've really got to make sure that anything that you want to do around offsetting is verified carbon standard, and that you have a sort of strategy for that. It's what people perceive.
Yeah,
is a
and
good thing
I think
to do
it's
to
the
plant
word
a tree,
offsetting, isn't it? It's just such a dirty word. I don't like it because it looks like you're trying to cover up. Because in the past, that's what people did. They carried on as normal, and then we'll just plant some trees. That's fine. I feel better about life. And it's like, but that isn't the answer. We need to stop doing things, and we do need to be bolder about what we're doing, and we're moving way too slowly, and I know, we're looking to the government to do things. That's not going to happen. That's going to have to come from us and from SMEs and from people driving the change underneath. But in terms of, we need to reduce what we're doing, reduce. And so the only amount that we're offsetting is that tiny residual thing that we cannot do anything about. And then we get into, the carbon like sucking technologies and carbon reduction and everything. So, and that is coming. But it's just in the meantime, we need to be doing a hell of a lot more to minimise what we're actually creating in the first place.
Any questions? Yes. Hello.
So I work for an engineering membership body, and a lot of what you say really resonates with our technical events, but there's also technical content. I don't see the issue changing to plant-based meals, because the value is like a lot in what the conference itself has. Where I do find a struggle is the more networking events, like particularly black tie dinners. I wondered if you could offer any advice. I'm very nervous of changing a meal to giving everybody a plant-based meal. If that's just me panicking, what's your advice around those kind of events?
I mean, for me, I used to be of the opinion, just cut it out, but explain why you're doing it. What we don't want to do is, hide the, let's hope they don't notice the beef's come off the menu. I would own that and say, this is what we're doing and this is why. But if you're not ready to take that step yet, or you're worried, about it being too harsh, it's just trying to reduce that, or maybe taking red meat off and, focusing more on poultry because that has a lower carbon footprint. But also for me, and again, this can come back to the experience piece, plant-based food is amazing. Just do it really well. I attended a session previously, and there was amazing chefs that could tell the story, and they're using all of the ingredient, and make that part of the event, bring them into the event, have live cooking stations, and making it more sort of theatrical almost, so that it's part of the experience, and almost showing it isn't all mung beans and cabbages and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? It's almost trying to educate people on how amazing it can be, and I think people are often surprised. I certainly am when it comes to plant-based food.
Yeah, and one of the just really practical things that we've seen, particularly for events like that, is to flip it and say, actually, this is the menu. Would you like red meat? You have to opt in. And that starts to help you build the evidence to say, I don't actually need to do this because, look, everyone's opting for the more plant-based. So it doesn't, as you say, it doesn't have to be overnight change, but starting the conversation, putting that out there in the first place will make people think.
And I think moving, the sustainable option, or with anything that you're doing, moving that to being at the top of the list. Moving meat down the list, having the plant-based option first, even having a little M next to the meat-based option rather than a V or a VE next to the vegan option. So it's just, I think, cute little ways that you can try and trying to be fun with it. We're all about creating experiences for people, and I think it's trying to educate people in a way that starts a conversation and sort of like, oh, that's interesting, or you can include the carbon footprint on your menus. That gets people talking as well.
Venues have a little bit of work to do here, though, too.
Yeah.
There's still, we did a tasting 2 weeks ago. There was 5 meat main courses, 1 vegetarian, 1 vegan. So, we ultimately don't have any choice in that scenario because we would be going for the.
Yeah.
So, I'd like to encourage venues to do more.
Absolutely. Yeah, we need to drive the demand, and they need to drive the options too. Totally.
But the fact that you're asking the question will
brilliant,
help to push.
But my 10 pence on your comment is that it's always been meat or vegetarian. Now, the word vegetarian hasn't actually just been used. You mentioned vegan, but not vegetarian. So the standard is a plant-based option. That doesn't mean it's plant-based. It doesn't have any stigma around it. It's not got its own label. It just happens to be that's what we're having for supper. And if you want to have the meat option, it becomes the second option, not the vegetarian option. It's just the plant-based option. That's perhaps just tweaking how it's perceived by people without having to say, oh, well, it's all veggie. It's not even veggie, it's just plant-based. It's slightly different. That's my opinion. Perhaps we buy into it. Yeah, they could probably possibly buy into it more than oh, we've all been turned into veggies overnight, or something like that. You can hear some people saying that. So that's just my thought. I'm rapidly becoming a plant-based person.
And that's the thing, you go and try it at an event, and then you take it home, and then it's contagious behaviours, and that's hopefully the idea.
We've got one more question actually. Yeah, no, it's yours.
Yeah, I suppose with things like telling the story of why we've chosen plant-based over meat, things like why we've chosen a certain cut for this. It's all. I feel like with sustainability, a lot of times it's quite complicated. It's quite sciencey, but it's quite hard to tell as like a snap story. I suppose, have you got any tips of how you can engage people into that story and explain why you've made the decisions, but in a way that's engaging for people out there?
I think for me it's starting at the very, very beginning. So as soon as you do start talking about the event, and for this particular event we obviously had quite a few obstacles in the way in terms of planning, everything's so short lead and so on, but it's starting it from the very beginning, and it's telling the story about each bit of it. As you say, is it all numbers? Probably not. It's making it relatable, so it's helping people to visualise. It's actually that footprint is you or I for the year. It's making it more meaningful. I think that makes it more impactful.
Yeah, and there is a venue that I work with. I'm based down in Kent, and the way that they sort of can help, they actually, not the name would suggest, but they reward people on their sustainable initiatives. So they run weddings, and notorious for baskets of the flip-flops at the end when people have worn very high heels and aren't comfortable. When they actually explain, actually you're aware of the carbon footprint of that and where they end up and the landfill element, and actually incentivise people to make those switches by they then offer I think it was like Gusbourne vineyards that you can do incentive trips, and they build that into their offering so that people are encouraged to make those swaps. So I think definitely agree with Pauline around the sort of the visualization piece, but I think trying to offer alternatives and making swaps and using the story to sort of switch it on its head, I think you can be quite I think just make it fun. I think is really the key thing in sort of incentivizing people, yes, and hoping that they're going to then take that on by themselves and move that along.
Time, it flies, doesn't it? Danielle, Pauline, thank you very much indeed. I've learned a lot today, I really have, and I'm going
There's
away.
so much.
I put notes all over here, and thank you very much. And
much.
I hopefully 1 or 2 points that you can take away today, and that's been of some help. We'd like to, and we've been talking about maybe running an actual whole day seminar in the future months where we can engage with a bigger audience, have more speakers, have more examples, have a plant-based lunch, and an option meat further down the line. And that's something which has come up as a result of this, because clearly we've only scratched the surface. The problem is not going to go away, it's going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And we need to lead from the front and not from the back.
But also see it as an opportunity. It's not doomsday.
Yeah.
This is an opportunity
to
be creative, and
Yeah.
there's huge amount of opportunities to revolutionise how we run events, and all for the better. And again, we're just talking about the environmental elements of sustainability here. We're not even touching on the social side. So that there's so many elements that it can touch, and it's all for the good in terms of future where we're going.
Daniel, Pauline, thank you very much indeed. Big round of applause for our experts. Thank you. Thank you very much.